The Pluckley Horror. Written and read by Huw Carr. Directed by Brendan James. Warning. Caution is advised before listening to this story. The Kent police officer who related to me his involvement in the case has claimed that some of the events described within the following account are considered hazardous. He further claimed that listening to one particular portion may be at the least unlucky and at the worst a curse. Some of the information we have deliberately distorted for the purpose of presenting it here, though the full text is potentially decipherable. Listener discretion is advised. All right, testing. Okay, it's just a little after 11 on June the 21st, 1993. I've come back from Ashford Police Station where I went to make a statement. They didn't bother taking it. When I came in, they could see I was terrified. I was still in shock, and I guess they could see it. When I told them what I had seen, they took me into an interview room. That's when I told them where it had happened. As soon as I did, their whole manner changed. What started with concern for the condition I was in and the desire to get the facts down while they were still fresh in my mind turned into downright annoyance. Didn't I know that the time of police officers was precious? Who did I think I was, trying to muddle them up with some sort of sick practical joke? I protested desperately, but despite how petrified I still was, the name of the village I had said made them dismiss everything I had to say. It couldn't be true. The officer who was taking my statement said he had lived in the vicinity of that place since he was a child and knew all the tall tales spread about it that brought the credulous and time-wasting busybodies like me down from London to lurk in the ghost hotspots in the night hours, scaring and annoying the locals. Well, if I can't get them to believe what I saw, I'm going to make damn sure that everyone comes to know the name of Pluckley. I'd first come across the name of Pluckley in a book in my childhood. We had a well-thumbed copy in my tiny school library. Somehow I convinced my mother to buy it for me, which is amazing to me when I think about it, as she is to this day a strict Christian and believes the only form of spirit is the Holy Ghost. And I used to pore over the page that was headed, "The Village with a Dozen Ghosts." Like pretty much all school kids at the time, I believed back then the ghosts were real. So when I got an invitation to spend a weekend with a friend down in Kent at nearby Bourton Melib, and I saw on the map how close Pluckley was, I jumped at the chance of seeing with my own eyes the supposed haunted sites that were captured in tiny blurred photographs in my book. There were 4 places in particular that I wanted to find. One was a creepy old white house called Greystones that looked in my book far more like a bleached skull than an house should. The second was the infamous Screaming Wood, known to the locals as Deering Wood. The third was a laneway known as Dicky Buss's Lane, where in the years of the First World War, a schoolmaster had hung himself and was found by the local children on the way to school. It has been claimed his spectral body can be seen hanging among the trees. The fourth was an aptly named Fright Corner, where a local highwayman named Robert Dubois was supposed to have met a grisly end, run through with a sword and impaled on a tree. Despite the warmth of the morning in Bourton Malib, by the time I came close to Edgerton, a fog had risen up. Now, this wasn't the mild fog I was used to where I live in Ilford. This was a proper pea super. I could barely see more than a dozen yards ahead. Despite this, the locals still sped along the narrow hedgerow-edged lanes. 2 or 3 times I only barely got a chance to get out of the way. It was probably because I was so busy concentrating on not having a collision with a mad local that I got hopelessly lost. That part of Kent has never gotten over the Second World War. Locals claim that back then they took down signposts to confuse any invading German force from over the Channel, and since then they've never got around to putting them back up 50 years later. When I realised I wasn't sure I was still on the right road that had been described to me, I couldn't find a blasted sign to steer me right. I just about decided to turn around and give up on Pluckley and its ghosts when I got my first real scare. I had half an eye on the rear vision mirror, which for the most part was only showing fleeting grey shapes of trees before they disappeared into the thick fog, and suddenly a shape darted into view as if it was right up at the back window, and I swerved. I couldn't help myself. It was as if someone had run by the back window, but I was travelling at least 40. How could I have not hit them? The car bumped as I left the road, and the left wheel ran into a shallow ditch. With a clang, my front right wheel cover bounced off and rolled at speed further up the road until it disappeared in the mist and bushes on the road's far side. I looked fearfully into the rear-view mirror and then spun around in my seat to look for signs of having hit someone. My heart was thundering and sweat was dampening my forehead. Seeing nothing, I cautiously got out and walked a score of feet back down the way I'd come to where I thought I'd seen the shape. The hedgerow on the right side of the road was head high. No one could have gone that way. And on the left, although it was only waist high, it was still way too broad to have gotten across. Besides, it was thick with stinging nettle. When I realised there was no way that I had hit someone, I let out a long breath. It was only then that I discovered how much I was shaken. If I had any common sense after that scare, I would have given up on my hubcap for lost, turned around, and left that horrible place behind me. Instead, I walked forward to the car, along the verge on the right-hand side of the road, hoping to find where the wheel cover had ended up. A couple of dozen feet on, I came to a freeway junction, with a road branching off to the left. Then I noticed a small sign on the opposite side, almost swallowed up by the hedgerow on the right, which read, "The Pinnock." At this point, I reasoned that my hubcap surely couldn't have rolled this far, over 100 feet. I resolved to only take a few more steps on when I smelt what I first thought was wood smoke, though it had a far more pungent reek to it. It had a damp smell. Beneath that was an odour I knew, but I couldn't immediately recognise it. And then I saw a huddled shape crouching beside the trees on the left. For a moment I took it to be a mound of discarded rags, somehow balanced and standing upright, but then the upper portion of the rags seemed to turn in my direction. The pale shape of a chin jutted out from beneath a dishevelled hood or bonnet maybe, and although I could not see the features of the small person's face, they seemed to be regarding me. Why were they sitting alone in this damp and miserable place? I couldn't guess, but I walked towards them regardless, asking if they might have heard my dislodged wheel cover and perhaps seen where it had come to rest. It was then that I noticed the person was sitting on a low row of bricks that formed the edge of a small bridge. They seemed to regard me for a minute before they spoke in a rasping voice, and I discovered the stranger was a woman. "You don't look half peaky," she said, and then began to cough. To me, her lungs sounded thick with phlegm. I took a step or two nearer. Too close it seemed, as her smell came distinctly to me. It's like wet dog, mouldering vegetables and stale urine. And beneath that, a strange clinical smell that was driving me insane as my mind fought to recognize it. Gasping for breath now, she fumbled among her malodorous wrappings, pulled open her coat, and produced a long-stemmed pipe. She turned to me again. Wisps of grey hung out from beneath her bonnet, and her mouth showed only a few teeth. "You don't have a bit of baccy about you, do ye?" she asked hopefully. I shook my head and she grumbled, fishing through her jacket. Her movement produced great wafts of her smell to be cast my way, and then, in a flash, the underlying chemical smell came to me. It was the smell of gin. I wondered if she'd been drinking from an open bottle, but I couldn't see one. She cried out in delight, and then produced a small scrap of cloth which she unbound. Inside was a sprinkling of rough tobacco. I saw too why she smelled so strongly of gin. Her hands shook violently the whole time she worked the weed into her pipe. I imagined then, when she managed to get her hands on a bottle of gin, she would probably spill as much as she got in her mouth. That and the lack of teeth made her drool almost continuously. The thick stained scarf about her neck was likely soaked in years of it. Despite her shaking, she worked with focused concentration to get every shred of tobacco into the bowl of her pipe and pressed it down with a thick yellowed nail. I asked her if she was all right out in the cold. I half thought of playing the Good Samaritan for once. I'd come all this way and got nothing out of the trip. Driving her somewhere warm, maybe down the local pub to buy her some lunch. It made me feel that it might have been some purpose to coming all the way down here, but then I got another whiff of her, and I knew I'd never get the stink out of my car. "I been come here some twice 20 summers, and I be done all right. Can't get better cress than what grows neath this bridge. I has some for myself, and then I sells the rest." A thought crossed my mind, and I asked, "Do you happen to know the way to Fright Corner?" "Fright Corner, you say?" she replied, and then she coughed again. "You know, it's where the highwayman Dubois, where his ghost is supposed to haunt at night." "Don't know no Dubois, but where Robert Du Bois died, where they killed him." She inclined her head in the direction of the junction I'd just walked past. "'Twas there." I remember smiling at this as I turned to look back at the small triangle of green grass where the freeways met. It seemed like the type of place where they would have hung a gibbet. The fog was still thick, so that my car was just barely a dark shape on the verge. I asked if she'd ever heard anything in her 40 or more years that she'd been coming to this spot. The account in my book had said that the ghastly scene was enacted every night. I might have seen some things, But that's not half as bad as what I've heard. But these things ain't for the telling, horrible things. Yous tell of them and they grows on in the telling, see? They're waiting, feeding the souls of people with loose tongues, so that they're always on their lips. They wants it as they can cling on to here, like a leech, and they wants their blood. I can remember those words so clearly now, even though at the time I know I was smiling with a sceptical look on my face. I'd loved to believe in tales like this as a kid, but then in my imagination the world was still full of pirates and monsters. Adult life had sanitized those beliefs. I knew then that the nostalgia of rumour of the place meant more to me than actually hearing the story firsthand. By the stench coming off the old woman and the fact that she apparently couldn't count past 20, I dismissed her as an unreliable witness, a simpleton who probably washed in moonlight to cure her warts. I think the only thing I said in reply was something like, "I'm sorry, who?" The woman regarded me again for a long moment. One hand returned inside her coat and after an effort brought out a small cardboard box. I wasn't sure what the box was for until I saw the words Bryant and May's London Matches. As her hand shook, she slowly opened the box to expose 3 or 4 matches inside before she spoke again. They were large, much larger than a type I was familiar with. When she spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. The shades, the shadows, what people call ghosts. People always makes the mistake. You think ghosts is the dead who comes back, but they ain't. When yous live so close by 'em, yous learn a thing or two. Suddenly, I felt I had misjudged her. If she was simple as I had thought, surely she would just repeat the same old stories everyone knew. But here she was, ready to expound her own potentially original idea. I'd never heard someone say ghosts weren't the spirits of the dead before. Despite the part of me that was already preparing to put on a straight face as she mumbled a hodgepodge of New Age bollocks, there was a part of me that was yearning to be told something new and exciting, like I was a small child again. She placed one arthritic finger into the box and played with a group of oversized matches. I realised she must have chosen the large safety ones because the normal size would be practically impossible for her bent fingers to grip. I was pretty sure that she was weighing up whether she should spill some of her ideas to me. She might have been smart enough to think I would laugh at her ideas if they were too weird. "Why does ye want to know?" she suddenly asked suspiciously. "There's things we ain't supposed to talk about, not until we reaches the blessed place. There them things can't do no harm as they can here." Quickly I thought of all the possible ways to tease this thing out of her that she was holding on to. I could say that if she was interesting enough, we could write it up and put it in the paper. Maybe the article could bring her some money. I looked at her and knew the promise of future money was pies in the sky. I thought about what it must be like for her to be old and forgotten, living in the 20th century and having to live off scraps by the roadside. No little grandchild to visit on a Sunday, sit on her knee and tell stories to. So I said this to her. "Because your story matters. No one else can tell it. And after you're gone, someone has to say they knew something because only you could tell it to them. I can tell that what you're going to say is important. No one knows what you know." That did it. I could see in her face I had said something she hadn't expected. I had made her feel that she was important. She all but puffed out her chest and sat more upright. I was so pleased with myself that I felt a smile of satisfaction rising on my face, so I scratched my upper lip with my thumb to cover it and get hold of myself. She said, "All right," in a hushed way, and then after a pause and a cough, she began. "That the boy's what died there. He's a case that shows what them shades are. He knew, 'cause he was rotten inside through his life. You can hear it when he screams out in the night, the way he did when he was killed there. You see's a good life. They doesn't have no shades waiting round them. Shades stay away from those ones. It's like they've a sour taste to them. The shades, they doesn't live as yous and I does. They has to live on top of life, or over it, so to speak. A ghost ain't the dead. A ghost is a shade that has used the dead to stay. It's stolen them away and using the soul they had to keep them alight, like. You see what I mean?" As she spoke, whether it was the nature of that place and how it looked in the mist, there was something about the very shape of the way those roads joined together that I felt like they had been built that way for a purpose, as if the very angles they joined together formed a shape to hold something there. I don't know. It sounds mad, but that's what I began to feel. Anyway, as she spoke, her words began to make less and less sense. The words I remember here are all that came clearly to me. I know she spoke on and on, but with each utterance the sounds became more horrible to hear. They began to buzz out of her hanging, toothless mouth like someone was breathing through a broken pipe. Have you ever been drunk and tried to listen to the person talking in front of you? You know, they're making sense, but the words or sounds of the words can't penetrate into your mind. It was like that. I began to feel afraid that she wasn't making inhuman alien sounds, but that I was losing all ability to hold on to my sanity. And she went on and on. Her mouth was like a black hole, and out of it a snake-like horror of dark, meaningless words was slithering out. A black hand was reaching out of her mouth with claw-like fingers, reaching for me. She lit her match. A bright little flame of gold blazed in front of me, and suddenly the world seemed right again. She looked up at me with the match half lifted to the bowl of her pipe. Her eyes, which I could see clearly now, were open with, was it terror? "What you looking at me like that for?" she said, trembling. Her hand shook. The ember that burned in her hand remained poised. It flared and grew in brightness, and I saw a little flame leap along the length of the match and strike out at her shaking fingers. She screamed and dropped the match, which at once fell down into her scarf. "The match!" I yelled, and reached out for where it had fallen. It happened faster than I would have believed. From among the folds of her scarf, a bluish flame spurted. The woman screamed again and struck wildly at it, but her desperate slapping seemed to fan it more. The flame burned a hungry yellow, and within a moment it grew into a fearful, spitting blaze that encircled her neck. Despite the hideous smell of rancid body odour and burning hair, I reached out to try and pull the scarf away. It tightened. She rose with a terrifying shriek as the growing flames consumed her head. I could see her screaming mouth, open and black as the fire made her face crackle. Too late. The idea of pushing her off the bridge and into the shallow creek came to me. She waved like an insane scarecrow in a storm as the crackling fire ate at her shoulders, her bust, and did not pause in its feast until her upper body was one howling pillar of flame. I turned and ran. In my car, I reversed madly and span around, thrusting my foot on the pedal to leave that place behind. I could not help but see the human-shaped inferno that stumbled and flailed in the reflection of a mirror. I drove blindly. If I met anyone coming the same way, I don't think I'd be here now to record this. I passed through the village of Pluckley, each of the old houses looking like a grey screaming face, topped with a dark bonnet of their roofs. Yet in time, I realised I had to report what I had seen. I spent some time first concocting how I was going to admit that I ran away from the woman. I could have done something. I know I should have tried to save her, but it was the thought of having to see what that fire had done to her face, and the smell of the stench of her body and her clothes mixed with that seared flesh. I missed the turn off onto the M20 and ended up at Charing. My hands were shaking without control, almost like her hands. Although I was surrounded by the more familiar shapes of the typical Kentish white painted wood cottages and the more modern brick houses, I couldn't get the feeling that followed me from Pluckley out of my mind. I felt I was being hunted. Something knew what I had done. Inside the car, I could almost smell the stink of her burning clothes. It took me ages to find somewhere that looked like it was open, and then I learned I had to go to Ashford anyway to find a police station. So, I made my way there, and as you heard, they thought the whole thing was a joke. The officer who had lived in Pluckley said everyone round there had heard the story of the gypsy watercress woman, who was supposed to have burned to death when her clothing caught fire. When I left there, I was still shaking. The only thing that kept going round and round in my head was whether I was going to keep on shaking till I ended up like her. There was a pub on the opposite side of the road, so I took myself in there. I was craving the human company. I think I frightened them because when I tried to talk to people, my voice was strained and I laughed like a madman. I just stayed there for hours, drinking too much until a lady near me started to order gin. I couldn't bear to smell it. I can't get that smell out my nose. I can smell it here, in my house now. My house is all shadows. If I'm to be honest,
I really started recording this so I can hear a voice. But I can't stop remembering them flames. The smell of her, it's almost getting worse. It's like she's right here in my house, beside me. And all I can think about is the shape I saw that made me swerve and run off the road and started this whole bloody thing. No, what started this bloody thing was the book I had when I was a child. I found it too. I've kept it, and it's here in front of me now. I've got it open at the double-page spread on Pluckley. There are 12 ghosts listed, but there's nothing about a woman who burnt herself to death.
Detective Inspector Jarrett pushed the stop button on the tape recorder, shutting off the voice that had degenerated into something like a whimper. He looked across at Sergeant Godden, who exhaled a long breath before he asked, "What do you make of it?" Jarrett looked back at the confused, distorted and charred pile of remains and rubbed his nose. The stench of ash was making his eyes smart. "I don't know. I'll ring Ashford tomorrow and check to see if they have any report of someone matching his description coming in. We'll need to find a recent photo, of course. I can't even begin to guess what he looked like before this." The body lay only 3 feet from the little table on which the tape recorder and the open book sat. It had twisted and curled in the fire that had burnt it beyond recognition. It had been hot enough to incinerate the clothes on the corpse, but had somehow not spread further than a small circle of carpet. "I thought the tape was going to be a suicide message," Godden admitted. "And now, it's weird, ain't it? Even I can smell gin. It's strange though, don't you think?" "What?" Jarrett all but laughed. "What part of it? The whole bloody thing is strange." Godden pointed to the pages of the open book that was titled "The Village with a Dozen Ghosts." "Just that he said the book didn't mention a ghost of a woman who burned, but look, right here. How could he have missed that?" Jarrett stared at the small black writing on a green map of the village of Pluckley. Beneath a subheading that read, "The Ghost of the Gypsy Woman," he read the following words: "The spectre of a pipe-smoking gypsy woman, huddled in a tattered shawl, is often claimed to be visible near the bridge by the crossroads. She was burned to death in mysterious circumstances and has haunted the site ever since." This edition of the Black Dog Chronicles is now available on Bandcamp. You can be the first to own this story and more. Please support our channel by purchasing a copy and telling your friends. If you don't purchase a copy, please remember, we'll start doing ASMR. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Press the notification bell to be up to date with every new story. And as always, look out for the monsters.